You've done this before. You found something, a course, a plan, a habit, a project. And for a few days, it felt different. You could already see where it was going. You talked about it. You imagined the results. You told yourself this time was real. Then the silence arrived. The part with no reward, no feedback, no visible progress. And something in your brain quietly started looking for the next beginning. That pattern has a name, and it's not laziness. In ancient Sparta, young boys were removed from their homes at the age of 7 and placed into a state-controlled education system known as the Agoge. For the next 13 years, their lives were not their own. They didn't choose their training, their schedule, or their companions. The structure was imposed, continuously, relentlessly, and there was almost no room for personal drift. Modern people look at that system and see harshness, but there's something in it worth examining carefully. Because those boys grew into men who finished things, not because they were born different. Because the environment they lived in made starting something and quietly abandoning it almost structurally impossible. Most of us live in the opposite environment, and we are paying for it in ways we barely notice. Think about the last month of your life. Not what you planned to do, what you actually did. How many things did you begin? How many are still open? A half-read book, a course you paid for and haven't touched, a workout routine that lasted 11 days, a business idea you sketched out and then let fade, a creative project that felt exciting until it became work. This isn't rare, and it's not a character flaw. It's almost universal in cultures where stimulation is constant and commitment is optional. The pattern is consistent. The beginning of something new carries a charge. There's energy, curiosity, a sense of possibility. In those first days, the brain is engaged. You feel momentum. But as the novelty fades and the task becomes repetitive, which is exactly when real progress happens, something shifts. The brain starts looking elsewhere. Another idea, another beginning, another charge. What looks like ambition from the outside is often just a rotating door of enthusiasms. And what gets lost inside that rotation is depth. In practice, this shows up as weeks where you switch between 5 different priorities and advance none of them. Or mornings that begin with clear intention and dissolve into reactive scrolling. Or a life that feels very busy and somehow very shallow at the same time. Constant movement that doesn't travel anywhere. The problem is not that people lack drive. The problem is that the environment we live in is structurally hostile to continuity. Every app, every notification, every new option is designed to interrupt. And the brain, which evolved to pay attention to novelty, is not well equipped to resist that on instinct alone. Xenophon, the Greek historian and philosopher who studied Spartan society closely, wrote that Lycurgus, the lawgiver credited with shaping Spartan culture, deliberately removed child-rearing from private family control and placed it under public authority. According to Xenophon, this was done because Lycurgus believed that personal pleasure and self-will naturally intensify during youth, and that without deliberate structure to counter them, those forces would dominate. What followed was the Agoge, a system of continuous, supervised training that left almost no room for individual drift. The boys were kept occupied, not occasionally, relentlessly. Plutarch records that the aim was not merely to teach skills, but to fix principles into habit through repetition, because laws written on paper did nothing. Only what was built into the body and the daily rhythm lasted. Historians are careful to note that we have no perfectly complete account of Spartan life, and some of what ancient writers describe may have been idealized or filtered through political intent. The details vary across sources, but the structural feature that multiple accounts agree on is this: the system reduced dispersal. It took a phase of life defined by impulse and reoriented it around sustained commitment. There was no mechanism for a Spartan boy to decide midway through his training, that he preferred something else. The structure didn't offer that exit, not as punishment, as design. This is not a proposal to recreate that system. It's a question worth sitting with. What does it mean to live in a world where almost every exit is always available, and where the brain is continuously offered something newer and more stimulating than what it's currently doing? There are two mechanisms at the core of this pattern that psychology has mapped with some clarity. The first is novelty bias. The brain does not value all options equally. It tends to assign higher perceived value to what is new. This is connected to dopaminergic activity. Dopamine responds strongly to the anticipation of reward, and new beginnings are full of anticipation. The middle of a project, by contrast, is mostly labor with uncertain payoff. The brain knows this. It starts calculating whether the next beginning might be more worth it. This is not a bug. Novelty detection was a survival advantage, but in an environment where new options are infinite and always one click away, that same mechanism becomes a mechanism for perpetual abandonment. The second is what researchers call attention residue. When you leave a task unfinished to start something else, part of your cognitive attention stays attached to the abandoned task. You're physically doing the new thing, but your processing capacity is split. The American Psychological Association has summarized research showing that as tasks become more complex, the cost of switching between them increases significantly. What feels like flexibility is often fragmented attention, and fragmented attention produces fragmented results. The practical implication is straightforward but uncomfortable. Depth requires continuity, and continuity requires tolerating the part of a process that isn't exciting, the phase after the beginning and before the result, where the only thing sustaining you is structure and decision, not feeling. That's the window most people exit through. Building tolerance for that window is not about willpower in some abstract sense. It's about reducing the available exits, designing your environment so that the friction of stopping is higher than the friction of continuing. This is what the Spartan system did institutionally. The modern version of it is personal and deliberate, but the logic is the same. If you want to go deeper into this, subscribe. Each video in this series adds another layer. Here is something historians note about Sparta's end. The system that produced extraordinary continuity and discipline also carried within it a structural fragility. As Sparta's population declined and its rigid way of life became increasingly difficult to sustain, the culture did not adapt gradually. It had never built the capacity to adapt. Rigidity that had been a source of strength became, under different conditions, a source of collapse. Plutarch observed that when Spartan men were eventually exposed to wealth, after military campaigns in Asia, the culture began to erode from the inside, not through external defeat, through comfort, through the sudden availability of things they had never been trained to resist. The discipline that had defined them for centuries started dissolving not on a battlefield, but in private rooms, in quiet choices, in the slow replacement of structure with ease. There is something in that worth holding. The goal is not to eliminate choice or manufacture a life with no exits. The goal is to recognize that the capacity to stay, to continue past the point where it's exciting, to be present with something that has become difficult and unrewarding in the short term, is a skill. And like any skill, it atrophies without use. The modern environment does not train that skill. It trains the opposite. It rewards novelty, optimizes for engagement, and makes beginning feel like progress because beginning feels good and progress often doesn't. Not at first. The Spartan boy who finished 13 years of training did not finish because he wanted to every day. He finished because the structure around him made continuity the default and abandonment the difficult choice. Most of us have it reversed, and the uncomfortable part is that we usually know this. It's not hidden information. Most people who abandon projects know they're abandoning them. Most people who drift between beginnings can feel the drift happening. The awareness is there. What's missing is not insight, it's architecture. A structure that makes the right behavior the easier behavior, rather than the heroic one. Because heroic behavior isn't sustainable. You can't rely on feeling ready, feeling motivated, feeling clear. Those states are temporary, and they arrive on no fixed schedule. What's sustainable is a system that moves you forward even when none of those feelings are present. That's what the Agoge was, stripped of its historical particulars. A machine for removing the reliance on internal mood as the driver of external behavior. You build that machine yourself now, piece by piece. Not by becoming stricter or harder on yourself. That rarely works and usually doesn't last. But by making the default harder to escape. By removing options at the moment of decision, rather than fighting them with willpower in real time. Close the tabs. Finish one thing before opening another. Make the exit cost something. Not everything, and not forever. Just enough that your brain has to reckon with it. That is not discipline in the motivational sense. It is design. And design is quieter, slower, and far more reliable than inspiration. The question is not whether you're capable of finishing things. The evidence from your own life probably tells you that you are, when the conditions are right. The question is what conditions you're creating, and whether those conditions make continuity easier or harder than the next beginning. Discipline doesn't live in motivation. It lives in structure. And structure is a choice, usually an uncomfortable one, that you make before the feeling arrives. You didn't become scattered overnight. You became comfortable slowly.